Welcome to the 6th episode of the Lion-Faced Guru podcast. This is the second part of Kim Katami's interview with Lama John Hoag. While the first part was mainly about Lama John's experience with Japanese Zen and how he eventually got into Vajrayana Buddhism, this interview goes much deeper into Lama John's experiences of practicing directly with the great Dzogchen masters of the last century, like Dudjom Rinpoche, Chatral Rinpoche, Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche, and Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche. Lama John and Kim Katami also discussed the future of Vajrayana Buddhism and how the tantric practices can and should be taught in a simple and direct way fitting to the Western mind. Enjoy.
I wanted to ask you before we started, maybe discuss a little bit about your ideas that you were commenting last time you were taking from Omori Sogen and Terayama Sensei's, appreciation of the kind of energy and realization that they could immediately see in the calligraphy that they looked at, either of the students or of the other great masters of the past, and how that relates to your kind of analysis of the Bhumi model that you have.
Yeah,
I'd be very interested just to hear a few words about that, because I did have a very strong sense from being with Omori Roshi before. He would always, be, spot on in his critique of, people's energy states that he could just immediately perceive from looking at their calligraphy. And he was not hesitant at all. Sometimes he'd just shake his head and says, Mazui. Mazui means just sort of rotten, really.
Yeah.
But sometimes, equally, he would be very, very quick to praise some good qualities that he saw. So,
Yeah. I'm happy to talk about those things. So, last time we got to the point of when you talked a little bit about Dudjom Rinpoche and having met Chatral Rinpoche. So would it be okay if we started from the script, from the original script?
Yeah.
We could talk about your retreats, what practices you did, how long retreats you did, then the whole association with Dudjom Rinpoche, and then we could also talk about your practice experiences, what have been the benefits, and then then we can talk about those energy reading stuff and all that together.
Certainly.
Okay.
Well, I definitely, I was definitely pretty much going purely on that kind of perception, because, when I met Dudjom Rinpoche for the first time, I have to say, I had met some quite great practitioners before, but I have to say I never had the feeling that I'd met anyone of that level before. I mean, he was just like a completely transparent being, and at the same time as being transparent, just, like this sphere of transparent crystalline power right there. Unbelievable energy. The energy was so pure that there's nothing there to identify it as. You can't even really identify it as being powerful. It's like the wind sweeping through you, right?
Yeah.
I mean, go ahead.
Well, maybe just I'll take a moment just to introduce this episode. So, ladies and gentlemen, hello again. It's me, Kim, here hosting a follow-up, a sequel with Lama John Hoag. Welcome, everyone. If you didn't listen to the first part, didn't see the first part, please go back and listen to that so that you have all the information from there to continue this session. So we are back with Lama John. Happy to do the sequel, and please, what were you going to say? Were you going to continue about Dudjom Rinpoche?
The impression of Dudjom Rinpoche was clear. There was almost nothing there. And, at the same time, there was this enormous kind of energy, and the energy itself was so transparent. There was nothing really that you could point to as that energy. I mean, some great lamas you would meet, and they had like an overwhelming sense of stability and calm and this kind of feeling. But even that, you couldn't really point to. It was beyond even that. There was no kind of qualities to it that you could really grasp onto, and yet, you absolutely knew it. And you didn't even have to be in the same room. You could be downstairs in his house, and you would have the same experience, and you would have almost a direct perception of him at the same time up in his little room where he corrected the texts, Tibetan texts, and was editing there. And at the same time, you could be downstairs in the house, and you could absolutely know that he was aware that you were right there.
Yeah.
Really extraordinary. Yeah, I mean, sometimes I could even be walking by, because his house was sort of in the center of Kathmandu, in the old part of the city in Kathmandu. Sometimes I'd be walking by his house in the middle of the day when, he absolutely wasn't going to be receiving anyone. So I wouldn't bother to go, knock on the door or something. But at the same time, I would just pause there for a few minutes. Again, I could have an absolute certainty that, somehow I had connected there.
Yeah.
And you could just feel an amazing kind of wave of blessings from just noticing that.
Yeah, it's my own experience with being with mahasiddhas, whether physical or non-physical. It's sort of like you described that, there is this power, this pure power radiating from them, but it's sort of like at the same time, it's like looking into like a black hole or something, that there's nothing there, but it's sort of like the power and light of the sun is radiating through. Something like that, like transparent, but it's that transparency has so much power.
It's like the more transparent it is, the more powerful it is. Yeah. And then the less there is there to actually identify or put your finger on, right? Yeah. It's really unbelievable. I mean, I must say, I didn't really experience that, except, just very infrequently, maybe with Omori Sogen Roshi or Yamada Muman, just for a few moments. But and maybe is Nicky Voko. You have some beautiful calligraphy by him also. He was the
Yes.
head Roshi, the Kancho of Tenryuji.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
You know, he was quite a special figure, I think. Also, but among the Tibetans, there were many masters, maybe not quite approaching that same degree as Dudjom Rinpoche, but I would say that, Chatral Rinpoche and Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche and, His Holiness, the 16th Karmapa. So there were many lamas in the Tibetan tradition that, had very, very advanced level of realization like that. And especially when I was there in the late 70s through the 80s, now that's very rare, not many of that.
Yeah. As you mentioned, there are all these, the previous generations of lamas who many trained in Tibet and became mahasiddhas, living Buddhas. And what do you think about the future of Vajrayana Buddhism in general in the world and also in the West? What do you think about that? How does it look like to you?
Well, it depends how you classify Vajrayana. So from one perspective, Vajrayana has sort of engulfed the teachings such as Dzogchen, Mahamudra, and Madhyamaka. In another sense, we can say that these are actually a separate kind of set of teachings or a separate kind of yana. So I think for very simple, direct Vajrayana teaching, that is very good. I think there's a lot of potential, but I think it hasn't been explained well to Westerners.
Right.
So Westerners are very into video games, augmented reality, right? And artificial, or completely artificial virtual reality. So I don't see why young people can't adopt that same interest and same ability to relate to Vajrayana, because Vajrayana is actually just another kind of practice of augmented reality, right? We augment ourselves into, seeing ourselves as this character. So, instead of seeing ourselves as some kind of superhero or some kind of warrior going around and blowing things up with different levels of guns and bombs and weapons, there's no reason that we can't, apply that same kind of mental imagination to our Vajrayana practice. Now, people say that they have the greatest difficulty in doing any kind of visualization. That's the common complaint that I hear from Westerners. I can't visualize. No, I can't visualize at all. I have so much trouble visualizing. But they don't seem to have any problem imagining themselves, in a different context.
Yeah, that's true. That's totally true.
So I think we need to adopt that kind of vocabulary so it can become open to them, right? And people don't seem to have any problem with acting, right? I mean, if they want to feel like they're going to be the next Brad Pitt or the next Angela Jolie, right? In the movie, they don't seem to have any problem with that, you know? So, you know, actually in the very beginning, the Mahayana is nothing but taking on an acting role, right?
Yeah.
You're auditioning to be a bodhisattva. And even in the Theravada and Hinayana, we're auditioning, first of all, to be a renunciate, and then we're auditioning to be an arhat, if we look at it in that way. And then we're auditioning to be a bodhisattva. We're auditioning to be a fearless, playing the role of a fearless being in the world. And then, you know, basically Mahayana, you're starting out, I mean, from one perspective, you're starting out with relative reality, relative mind, relative bodhicitta. So we audition for the role of a fearless bodhicitta, fearless warrior, even though we're not. But, you know, as all these self-help gurus in America, like Tony Robbins, are always saying, you fake it until you make it, right?
Yeah.
So that's just another way of saying that you practice in the role, just like Brad Pitt would practice in his role, right? And then, you know, he's not Achilles or, you know, whatever hero he's playing immediately, but he practices diligently. And then finally, you know, they maybe have 20 takes. And then the director says, yeah, you nailed it. You've got it. I captured it. It's perfect. Okay, let's go to the next scene, right? So if we can approach the Mahayana in that way, you know, that's something that's completely intelligible for Westerners. Of course, it's far, far superior if we can approach even the Theravada and especially the Mahayana from, you know, being taught by a Lama that really has that energetic realization of the core. Then they give you, bam, some kind of an energy plug-in there, and then you work up your relative presentation even from that energetic core, and eventually the relative and that core will connect, and then you've really got something super. But you need some really superior Lama to be giving the introduction in that way, like these Lamas that we were just talking about. That's why they're, you know, at a completely, from my perspective, it's, you know, it's like day and night. You know, whether you're getting the teaching, even though the subject matter is the same, and they could be, you know, giving the explanation of the same text, and both could be giving it in a very perfect intellectual way. If one actually has that realization and the other doesn't, it's going to be profoundly, profoundly different. But if we could approach the, you know, any of the Buddhist practices from that kind of perspective, and then think, you know, we can think approaching a very, you know, simple sort of Vajrayana practices that are kind of a crossover between Mahayana and Vajrayana, like the most simple Chenrezig practice, the most simple Tara practice, right? Even the most simple kind of Guru Rinpoche practice, right? Very, very simple practices. So this is just like an extension of Mahayana teachings. So if we can think of them in that way of kind of taking on a role, auditioning for a role, right?
Mm.
And then also thinking of them in terms of, just putting ourselves into augmented reality, thinking that we have one of those Oculus headsets on or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then I think it's, it's not a challenge at all for Westerners to be able to practice Vajrayana. If they're told, you need to visualize this is Vajrayana practice, now we're giving you initiation for this, blah, 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 then people become very, very tight in their minds.
Yeah.
Then they're saying, oh, this is something extremely difficult. This is something only the greatest Lama can do. Oh, this is something, blah, blah, blah. Then they're freezing themselves out from the practice.
Yeah.
I don't know. But I think, if you can approach it in this other kind of way, it should be entirely accessible. I mean, what's the difference between playing Chenrezig and playing Achilles or playing, Thor as a superhero, or, playing some other character in a Shakespeare drama,
Yeah.
What do you think?
I can perfectly. I agree. Like you said, I think we were talking about it in the first episode about, 3 different perspectives to tantric practice: external, internal, and secret. External meaning that you have some mantra or a visualization or both, or a mudra, some technique, some tool that help, which is like a light switch. So you use the technique, for example, say a mantra and the light goes on, and in that way, from external aspect, you go to internal aspect, to feeling some energy, perceiving it, feeling it, seeing that energy, whether it's guru or deity or whatever. And at some point when you do that, when you mingle with the internal aspect, with the energetic aspect, you discover the secret that, you have the same Buddha nature as the guru in Guru Yoga does, or, you realize that the deity is not some deity or God apart from you, that the deity is actually, your one's own wakeful nature flowering as a deity or taking the form of the deity. So I completely agree. I agree with the point that external part of tantric practice should be as simple as possible, because the sooner people can get to experiencing something, the better, because it's experiences that gives us confidence and gives us faith. And this is something that I've thought about quite a bit years ago, that tantric practices, we can have, or masters have, these pure visions, and then they describe that vision, and then people start doing that as a practice, that vision. But we can, for example, have a very short Guru Rinpoche mantra. Let's say like Namo Guru Rinpoche that we use a lot in Pemako. Or it can be a Guru Rinpoche mantra that is 5 pages long. So, there are these big differences in external aspect, but the internal aspect is always the same, and secret is always the same. So, I've seen it a lot that, people, when there are a lot of spiritual seekers everywhere, but I've seen it and felt it myself that it doesn't sound so attractive or interesting if the techniques are too complex. I think that the sooner one can get to that, from external to internal and then onward to secret, the better. Yeah.
So I also like to do these kind of very core practices like you do often, just using single syllable even.
Yeah.
So the seed syllable of Guru Rinpoche is hung. So we can practice hung, and then we can tell people, that's also the seed syllable of Guru Rinpoche. There are many ways to express hung. So, you can express it very peacefully, like Vajrasattva, or you can express it, intensely or with a little intensity, like Guru Rinpoche, or you can express it extremely intensely, like Vajrayana or Trolu. There's a limitless range of expression just with the single syllable hung. I think those kind of practices are very suitable and extremely accessible for people. And they're good practices. And if people can get beyond their initial kind of conceptual reservations, because nowadays in the West, I see in America especially, people, they've already read up on a lot of things. So they already know how Vajrayana should be or how Mahayana should be. So they're not very open to hearing other approaches.
Yeah. Brilliant. So what is the conclusion? How does the future of Vajrayana look like?
In the West, it's sort of an experiment. But as I said, I think if we can connect those kind of aspects that people can immediately relate to, I mean, any teenager can relate to virtual reality, right? In the web. So that shows, an enormous capacity to be receptive to visualization. Right?
Yeah.
They're eager to be doing this, or augmented reality, where they're putting themselves as they see themselves into some kind of a virtual setting, or they're just virtualizing certain aspects of their perception. So that's that's basically Mahayana, right? Mahayana, you're focusing on individual perceptions and then seeing each one step by step, successively, as manifestations of emptiness, right? First, and Vajrayana, then you're trying to see the whole mandala as a manifestation of emptiness, right? All at once. So that's like, not just capturing one Pokemon here or there. It's like, seeing the whole extent of what you can take in with your visual field and your hearing as virtual pure land, and seeing everything with pure perception. So initially, we're taking that to be seeing everything as a kind of pure land. That's the instruction in the Vajrayana, right? You finish the practice, and then everything you see is, every being is a manifestation of Chenrezig Gortara. Every perception you have in the world is an aspect of their pure land. Every sound is a sound of the mantra. So it's just seeing everything as, pure perception. So, there's no reason that we can't train to have a kind of virtual reality program that we could put on and just see everything as pure perception. And then take off the headset and just maintain that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not getting quite to the core. That's the outer aspect of it. But if you're going to be progressing, in a progressive way, in a Vajrayana kind of approach, and then using that to accumulate in, Dzogchen or Mahamudra or Madhyamaka view. That's one method of doing it. But of course, that's not the only method. And actually, that's not the method that Dudjom Rinpoche or Chatral Rinpoche or Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche would go for first.
Now that you mentioned methods and your masters, should we talk about what practices you did and about your retreat?
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
So, well, I met Dudjom Rinpoche, and every time I was there, I would just request him some very, very basic teaching. So I got some basic teaching actually on the Mahayana. I got some basic teaching on, especially I requested that he give me the transmission of the two most famous sort of aspirational prayers. So these are the things that I always tried to ask pretty much every great master that I met. So if I met them, whether they were great Sakya master like Daishung Rinpoche, who was also a great Dzogchen practitioner, or Chatral Rinpoche, Dudjom Rinpoche, I would always try to request the prayer of Kuntu Zangpo, it's called, which is a prayer of Samantabhadra. So not the Mahayana prayer of Samantabhadra, but the prayer that sets out the view of the Nyingma school and Dzogchen, basically. And it's just a very short prayer, about 3-4 pages. They mostly knew it by heart. They could recite that just like, in a minute or two and give the transmission. And the other prayer, the other teaching that I always requested was the third Karmapa's prayer of Mahamudra. It's laid out the Mahamudra view, and the third Karmapa was not only a Mahamudra practitioner, but he was also a great Dzogchen practitioner, and he was, had both lineages, so you can see a lot of that evident. So basically, requesting these oral transmissions from Lama like Chatral Rinpoche or Dudjom Rinpoche or Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, the wonderful thing about that is, it's like a way of sneaking in, You're not, if you come to them and say, Rinpoche, please give me some Dzogchen teaching, and they'll sort of, they won't say no, but they won't really say yes in the beginning, and they'll sort of be sizing you up, and, they probably will tell you, come at another time or something like this. But if you just request them to give you the oral transmission of this prayer, so this is a commonly read prayer. All the temples, all the, monks are reading that. But these are the kind of lamas, they're not just going to give you the oral transmission when you request this. They're going to give you like, bam, it's like they hit you with Thor's hammer. You have been indelibly stamped. You're never going to recover, right? You're never going to be the same again. Because they give the entirety, the truth of it, along with just the words. So, and then that's something they're never going to say no to. So, it's good to know the right approach in a lot of things, right? You know, and, you know, you have to sort of gauge things when they're in a good mood, when they're happy, and then you just hand them, you know, sort of slip this in and hand this to, please, Rinpoche, do you have just a moment? Could you please give me this so I can read this prayer? Then they're not going to say no, you know? And then, you know, you really, you've gotten into the castle, right?
Yeah.
They let down the drawbridge, they opened the iron grill, they opened the doors, and you got in the castle, right? Without any kind of difficulty or besieging, or, you know, you don't have to go and stand outside, please, Rinpoche, please, please, right that. So, you know, with the great masters, it's always good to, you know, use your every sense that you've got. And, you know, it's not that you're doing something underhand, but just try to act in a way that's going to make things, you know, the easiest in your approach.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So that's, you know, I got a lot of teaching like that. And then I got a terrific amount of teaching from just being there, just hanging around without any expectation. And then suddenly, out of the blue, someone will come, and they'd already had an appointment or something for Rinpoche to teach them something. Or they came and request, and Rinpoche just gives the teaching right then and there. You know, it was very spontaneous with a lot of these lamas. So, you know, if you're there, you got it. Like, I remember one day, I wasn't thinking to request it, but one day, a very lovely French lady who was teaching at the Alliance Française in Kathmandu, but she was a student also of Dudjom Rinpoche and Chatral Rinpoche. So she came one day while I was there at Dudjom Rinpoche's, and she requested all the Nundro teaching. So I hadn't requested that, but Dudjom Rinpoche just gave it to her, and I was just sitting right next to her there in the little room. So, you know, it's all just so much benefit, right? You just automatically, things are just happening like that, you know? And especially Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche was always giving teaching, you know? So if you were in his presence, you know, if you could stay there for a few years, like I did, then, you know, it's pretty much no important teaching from the Nyingma and also from many of the other traditions, because he had teachings from all the traditions that you wouldn't have received. Just amazing. And then just one day, you know, I was about to leave, and Dudjom Rinpoche said, "Hey," and I went back, and he said, "Oh, this is for you." And he gave me a little petya about a little text in Tibetan about meditation. So I said, "Thank you. I didn't know what that is, but anyway, then I read it, and just, you know, by good fortune, about a week or two later, I got the same text in English. It was one of the first translations that had been done. That was excellent translation, very, very clear, but by that time my Tibetan was also improving quite a lot, so I could actually read that in Tibetan, especially with the translation, and then after just, you know, in Tibetan itself. And so that was great. And every time after that, when I was able to meet Dudjom Rinpoche, whether it was in Nepal or in Taiwan or in Hong Kong. Basically, he just gave teachings on that single text, which is, basically kind of teaching on the ultimate level of shamatha vipassana, or the view from Nyingma point of view. So, but, for other people, he would give other teachings. So as I was saying, Chatral Rinpoche, Dudjom Rinpoche, and Dulku Rinpoche, basically they would always start out by giving people an introduction to the ultimate view. And usually they wouldn't do that by giving an explanation, although Dudjom Rinpoche would sometimes give an explanation, a brief explanation as well, but they would always do that energetically. And Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche, who was very famous for doing that, he would often do that explicitly. So I also had so many opportunities to meet him and take teachings from him. And he was exceedingly kind to me, he and his wife, because as I'll tell later, they provided a place for me to do retreat at the Guru Rinpoche cave in Parping outside of Kathmandu. But Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche, he would always, first thing if people came and asked about Dharma, no matter who it was, if it was a Nepali family with the grandparents, the children and the grandchildren, if it was some Tibetan businessman that came to make him an offering, if it were some Westerners, no matter who it was, he immediately would give them, brief introduction to mind, and not only the, verbal introduction, but he would give the energetic, genuine introduction, right there. Always. I mean, I remember sitting in his little retreat room up in Nagigumpa, which was like about 3,000 feet above on the mountainside above the Kathmandu Valley. And he had a very small room there. He was his little room, retreat place and quarters, maybe 10 feet square. And one day I think I sat there, he gave introduction to mind like 4 or 5 times in the course of about 3-4 hours. Whoever came in that day, he just give them the same talk, and the same introduction to mind. So it's really amazing. And Dudjom Rinpoche, Chatral Rinpoche, Khyentse Rinpoche, they would absolutely do the same thing, although they wouldn't go through all the talk usually, but they would definitely give you that energetic introduction. And, there's no way you could avoid knowing it. There's no way you could avoid knowing it. So they would always start with that. Then, whatever other teaching was going on, they would, go on to that. And if people weren't content, there's so many people, they have that, but then they're not content with it. So then they say, but Rinpoche, I need some, teachings, Mahayana teaching about bodhicitta, or I need some, Vajrayana teaching, or I need a Nundro teaching, or I need, this Yidam teaching, this special deity teaching. It's so powerful, right? Rinpoche would say, okay, but, people weren't content with what they were, they were already receiving the greatest treasure, but, they're still not feeling in their mind that that's sufficient. Well, if that's the case, then people need to go and, do some more other kinds of practices. That's very suitable. But if they are content with that, so then it's not so necessary. So I did receive a lot of teaching, and I also received a lot of teaching from Tulku Rinpoche, who was there because I met so many lamas. Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, he gave all the teachings from the Churling tradition. Then he gave all the teachings from Longchenpa, the 7 treasuries, and the 4, what's called the Nyingtik tradition, the 4 treasures from the Nyingtik tradition, and then many other teachings there. So there were many great lamas and tulkus, and all the younger tulkus, were all coming to attend these teachings. So nowadays, they're all about 50, 60 years old, even the young ones, and they all have, 10 different monasteries and centers all over the world, and some of them have 100, But back then, everybody was on very good terms because nobody had any money at all. Everyone was completely broke, and if that makes for a lot of harmony among everyone. If no one has any money and no one has any opportunity to be getting ahead in that kind of worldly way, then things are very, very harmonious generally. So, but one thing I could say, Dudjom Rinpoche and Chatral Rinpoche, they were very, very close, and they were extremely close energetically. So you could say almost like Dudjom Rinpoche was the manifestation of the present form of the Dudjom tradition, and Chatral Rinpoche was like the manifestation of Dudjom Lingpa, because Dudjom Rinpoche had been very high energy, kind of wrathful Lama. People were even afraid to come into his presence sometimes. He'd throw things at them. He had a sword that he wore, he would take out occasionally and swing it around. And so, extremely direct, and so Chatral Rinpoche was that way. If you did something that he liked, he would just beam and say, "Ale, very good, wonderful," and he'd just immediately be happy and give a very happy response. If you did something negative, he'd immediately let you know. So a lot of the younger tulkus were very, very hesitant about going to visit Chatral Rinpoche. Because, especially if they went there with one of their students or sponsors or something, they were always worried, oh my God, what would Chatral Rinpoche, what is he going to say something about me now that, I've been, all my antics, that he's heard about, and then embarrass me in front of my students or sponsors. So they were very, very worried and always on their super best behavior when they went to see him. It was always like walking on eggshells. With Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, he would forgive 10,000 things. He never criticized the Tulkus, even though he knew that they were up to all kinds of shenanigans, and he'd never say anything bad about them. Maybe once in a while, if you were just very privately, he would give you a little kind of joking kind of comments. So he'd say, you think being angry is good? And then he'd say, ha, 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 or something like that, you know. But he'd never, you know, in a big group or anything, you know, say anything the least bit critical. So all the young Tulkus and Lamas felt very, very relaxed when they were around him. Whereas, you know, Chatral Rinpoche, really, he was like Dudjom Rinpoche, you know, good, it was exceedingly good. And, you know, otherwise be careful because he might draw his sword out at any moment, you know. Chatral Rinpoche, he didn't have a sword, but he had a metaphorical sword. Believe me, all these young Tulkus and Rinpoches were really trembling. So really, he was like the manifestation in this present era of Dudjom. And, you know, very no-nonsense kind of approach.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, that really resonated with people, right? Generally, in the new schools, in the Gelugpa, Kagyu, and Sakya school, you know, they'll encourage the student gradually, you know, give up any kind of negativity. Please cultivate more positivity, cultivate loving kindness, you know, etc. No, don't go this way. Don't go into anger. Don't go into desire. Don't do this and that. Okay. So sort of gently pressing down and trying to minimize your negativities, and then encouraging the positive qualities to grow up. But in some parts of the Nyingma school, there's a slightly different approach. So that's the approach that Dudjom Rinpoche and Chatral Rinpoche especially, they took. Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, he sort of had half and half, we can say, at least from my experience. So what is this other approach in the Nyingma? That's, you know, let it be as it is. Okay, here's some negativity coming up, you know, let it grow. Let's see what it's going to turn into, right? And even in the case of Chatral Rinpoche and Dudjom Rinpoche, let's pour some fertilizer and water on it to see just how big this weed, how high it can grow up, right? How strong it is, right? And then they would encourage. And then at the last minute, just when it was least expected, when they saw this thing was at its full glory, they'd take, you know, the equivalent of a machete and just give it a whack. And then the whole edifice would come tumbling down, right in front of the student's eyes. You know, for a moment, it could be very, very painful, but in another way, you know, it's very, very swift and effective, that kind of method, right? Very swift and effective, right? Because then the whole thing is gone, right? It's not going to be sprouting up again. It's not going to be coming up in 1,000 different ways. It is eradicated.
So when you use the analogy of using a machete, what do you
sword?
Mean? Yeah, what do you mean by that? Do you mean like the Lama did something, or was it some instruction, or what do you actually mean?
No. So let me give an example. Okay, so you know, many times among the Tibetans, you know, the Tibetans are always on the outlook for a tulku, or a, you know, young Rinpoche being reborn in their family, or their community or their village or town or whatever, because, you know, that's like hitting the jackpot, right? Or it could be, right? It could. I mean, there's a lot of spiritual aspects to it, of course, right? So it's only a kind of material ambition, but there are a lot of material benefits as well, right? If you're find this Tulku and he's a great, great Lama, then there's going to be a lot of benefit for your community, right? It's like if the senator gets elected and he's from your town in, America, they're going to get a lot of money for the road projects, right?
Yeah.
In the town, everything's going to be repaired, right? You're not going to have any problem, right? So in the same way, so there were like certain, kind of experienced older Lamas, practitioners. I'm not saying like great Rinpoches or anything, but, very good Lamas. And they knew the great teachers well. They had long, interaction. They'd been their students for many, many years. They'd gone around with them, many, many years, so they could just come and converse with them anytime and like that, because they were old students. And so there were some of these Lamas that were like, we could say, like nowadays they have real estate brokers. Well, these were more like, occasionally they would function as Tulku brokers. So some family or group would have they would say, oh, Lama, I had these auspicious dreams, about my child or about, our family's child or this or that. I really think this baby is something special. I had such a good dream, and I saw Guru Rinpoche there, or I saw, Yeshe Sogil there, or I saw Tara there blessing the baby, and etc. And then the Lama would say, and they say, oh, can't we go and ask, Chatral Rinpoche, or, about whether this is, maybe he'll recognize this baby as a Tulku or something like that. And, so there's some kind of pure Dharma aspiration there, but there's also kind of a mixing in of all kinds of worldly aspirations, right?
Yeah.
Because this Lama has a big temple and, has lots of students and lots of monks or nuns and big following all over. So, right? So then they get this Lama to act as kind of a broker. So sometimes I would be, especially with Chatral Rinpoche, I would be visiting there, and one or two minibuses would pull up. And these are Nepali minibuses. So these are like old 1960s and 70s Mercedes delivery vans that are packed like with 30 people. So this old rattling diesel van would pull up, and all these village people and Tibetans and would disgorge with this Lama, and then they'd come up to see Chatral Rinpoche with this baby, and the baby would always be decked out in some very, little bit special clothes, like silk brocade clothes or something, to indicate that they were thinking he was very, very special. So they'd come in to see Chatral Rinpoche. Chatral Rinpoche let them all in. They'd all pile into his little room and all be sitting around. And then the Lama that was the kind of broker there, he would introduce everyone and say, and we have this child here also quite, we think, we had some very good dreams about the child and all this right off the bat, he would say. And Chatral Rinpoche, he wouldn't say anything. He'd just nod and say, And then he'd say, oh, yeah. And he'd call his attendant and he'd say, Lama so-and-so has come, and all the people, please bring in lots of tea for everyone and some snacks and some biscuits. And then they'd wait, and then the attendants would bring in all the snacks and nice things to eat and some cookies and whatnot. And they'd all have that. And then Rinpoche would be inquiring to the people about their village and what's happening there. And then he'd inquire about, who was coming to visit. And then he'd talk to the Lama that was the group leader about, where he'd been and who he'd been meeting. And this kind of conversation went on like for 45 minutes, an hour. Rinpoche not saying anything about the main subject there. And then, after an hour or so, the conversation would sort of dwindle out, right? I mean, there sort of wouldn't be any more kind of niceties to talk about, right? Sort of exhausted all the, the weather and the crops and who was, who had been where and whatnot. And then there was just sort of this pause. And generally, when you're with a great Lama or something, this was sort of the sign, okay, it's time to go, and the next people will be coming, right, in to visit, right? And so, they'd all be, and Chatral Rinpoche would give them all katas and everything, and they'd be on their way. And then, but he hadn't said anything about the main point, and all this time their hopes had been, slowly cooking on the stove there, right? Because actually they're talking about all this small talk, but in their mind, that's not what they're thinking about at all.
Yeah.
In their mind, they're only thinking about this one point. Now, when is Rinpoche going to say something about this baby? I wonder what Rinpoche, maybe he's going to say so. What can we say to him to ask him about this further, And every time Rinpoche is sort of deftly turning the conversation away from that, and then they forget for a moment, they're distracted for a moment. And then again, this worry is even coming stronger and stronger, growing in their mind like that, right? So, and so now they're confronted. They have to leave, right? The time is up, right? They can't just sit there all day, right? That's very impolite, and at the same time, it's just not possible. So, but they haven't gotten to the main point. So they're all getting up to leave. Rinpoche's giving them the kata, and then the kind of Tulku broker Lama, he comes up, before everyone's going out of the room, and then everyone sees him coming up to speak to Rinpoche, Chatral Rinpoche. And so they all stop going out the door. They all, are almost out the door, and then they're just crowded around the exit there, waiting, listening. And the Lama says, well, Rinpoche, what about this wonderful baby and these dreams we had? He said, don't you think this is really the incarnation of some great Lama, or maybe this person or that person? And then Chatral Rinpoche just say, he said, Pemba Yamare. He'd sort of shake his head. No benefit. Just say these two words. Just shake his head and say, no benefit. He didn't even say it wasn't the Tulku. He just said, no benefit. The whole thing right there. All these people, you could just see it was like their hearts were ripped out.
Ouch.
Doing them a big favor.
Yeah.
Because, they could years and years and years, and there were many other Lamas that would recognize Tulkus like that, even though, they knew it was sketchy. And then, the whole community and the family would put like 15, 20 years of effort into, trying to help this boy turn into a tulku. And then after he just give the whole thing up and, become a policeman in London or something, So, rather than giving them, 20 years of grief, Rinpoche had the wisdom, the insight, and the, ability. He can just cut that with the sword with 2 words, right? That, I mean, at that moment, it's extremely distressing, but, he saved them so much pain and suffering in the long run.
Yeah.
And then once Chatral Rinpoche said like that, there was absolutely no recourse because, as you may know, the Tibetans, there's no one in the world that's better at gossiping than Tibetan Lamas. So all of Chatral Rinpoche's attendants would be listening there, at the door, or 1 or 2 might be in the room. They would hear that. As soon as they heard that, they would be on their, phone talking to their friends in other parts of Kathmandu and the other Gumpas and everything. Oh, these people came and Chatral Rinpoche said, no benefit, forget it, like that. So there was no recourse for these people. No, when the word would, before they got back to Kathmandu, everybody in Kathmandu would already know what happened. So if they went to see any other Lama about this, no other Lama would touch it with a 10-foot pole, as we say in English, right? It was just like, no, I'm not, if he hadn't gone to Chatral Rinpoche first, maybe okay. But, if he said that, forget it. I'm just not, this is just not possible, right? So that was it. The whole thing was finished in a moment. But, he let it build up to its maximum capacity, potential. He let them put, as much energy into that as possible, and then he just cut it. So that's a very, very effective and frequently used method in part of the Nyingma. But, it's maybe not the best for people with a lot of anxiety and tension. You need to have some, he could do that with these Tibetan people because they, they had very, very great faith and devotion.
Yeah.
So even though, it was exceedingly painful, they definitely weren't going to go against that.
Yeah, that's true. It I was reminded, as you told that story, I was reminded of a similar story from Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche. It's a story from Sam Harris's book, and I can send you the whole story, the link after we finish. But long story short, there was this American lady who went to meet a Hindu Advaita guru, and as the lady was visiting this Advaita guru, she had some kind of an opening, like a shift, some kind of an awakening experience. And then she was celebrated as the new Buddha within that Advaita community. And then the group, they went to Nepal, Kathmandu, to meet Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche. And then somebody said that, this lady actually, she was just a couple of days ago, had this amazing awakening enlightenment experience, and her enlightenment was confirmed by this Advaita master. So what do you think? And Tulku Urgyen is, watching her little moment, and then very politely asking that, well, do you have thoughts? And the lady goes, no, I don't have any thoughts. It's just completely pure and perfect all the time. It's brilliant. It's awesome. And Tulku Urgyen goes, you don't have any thoughts, or do you? So let's try this. Let's just sit here and wait, and you tell me when you have the next thought. And then everybody goes quiet and waits, and like he's super polite. Tulku Urgyen, he's super polite. And they wait for a moment, and then the lady starts scratching her head like, well, I think that was a thought that I had. I just had a thought. And then, the whole, people realize that, okay, there's different definitions for enlightenment, and they understood it. But it was brilliantly delivered by Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche. It was brilliantly handled, that situation. It wasn't direct and blunt, but it was kind of kind and polite, but taking the root and getting it out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. At Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche, he was extremely masterful at that. And, he was also very, very masterful in his ordinary kind of dealings with, all the relative things that needed to be managed to build a huge monastery and run it and everything. So let me tell a little story about that, So actually, when they were in Tibet, when Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche was in Tibet, before the Chinese got to Lhasa, he was many times visiting the 16th Karmapa. And the 16th Karmapa, said several times to Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche, why don't you go to Nepal now and build a big temple for me and a monastery? And, he said this not once, but a couple times. And then Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche, he said to the Karmapa, he said, they were just sort of chatting. It wasn't like a kind of command or something. It was just sort of like the Karmapa was making a off-the-cuff kind of remark, And then the Karmapa said, I went on a pilgrimage to India a few years ago. And when I was there, I also went through Nepal. And, I met the king, and I met one of the government ministers said he'd give the land if I wanted to build a monastery there and a temple. And said, why don't you go to Nepal and just build this for me and start this? So this is when the Chinese weren't even, starting to invade Tibet yet. So Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche said, the Karmapa, go to Nepal. I don't know anything about Nepal. I've never been to Nepal. And besides that, Nepalis, they don't even speak Tibetan. They have their own language. I don't know a word of Nepali. I don't know anything about the customs there or anything. I'm not really up for going to Nepal. And then, like a year later, the Karmapa mentioned again, why don't you go to Nepal and, try to build this monastery? And then again, Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche said, I'm not the guy for that. It's really difficult, and I don't know anything about Nepal, but I have all these places here in Tibet to look after, et cetera, et cetera. Well, then the Chinese arrived in Lhasa, and then Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche and his whole family had to escape, right? So they fled. They arrived across the border, I think in Bhutan, I'm not sure. But anyway, very, very distressing circumstances. So then the Karmapa said, okay, again, why don't you go to Nepal and do this? Now you got to be here in India anyway. So then Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche finally agreed. Well, he got over to Nepal, And then the minister, the king was there, but, he wasn't so interested in doing anything anymore. And the minister that was very, very excited about building a monastery and everything had been removed from office. So then Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche was down to really difficult difficult conditions. But anyway, he did manage to build, this splendid, amazing, very large monastery. And at the time, it was, the only kind of new, wonderful, large Tibetan monastery that had been built there. And the Karmapa did come and consecrate it. And the Nepali king also came at the consecration, as well as the Lama I was telling you about that introduced me to Dudjom Rinpoche, Kuso Segu Rinpoche. He was there at the time. So unfortunately, I wasn't there at that time. It was like about a year and a half or 2 years before I arrived in Nepal. But, with great difficulty and effort, Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche, he did manage to build that monastery. And then after it was running and established, he also built a nunnery and a hermitage for himself way up where I was just describing, about 3,000 feet on the mountain behind the Bodhanath, on the outskirts of the Kathmandu Valley. And he would stay there most of the time. But he was so expert, he could run the monastery, that huge monastery, from the hermitage. And he would have 2 or 3 times a week the people that were the administrators there. His sons were in charge, especially his older son, Chukinima Rinpoche. But he was young at the time. He was only in his 30s, perhaps. But he was, running the monastery. But really, Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche was running it but he was so skillful, he would have the managers come up once or twice a week. They'd get their running orders, and boy, they better follow them too. Because, he knew exactly what was going on down there, even though he was, 10 miles away. Mm-hmm. Really extraordinary. And he built many, many temples. He built a temple for each of his sons that were Tulkus, Minja Rinpoche, and Soni Rinpoche. And he built a temple also for his grandson, so Pakcho Rinpoche. And all of this he managed to do while he was most of the time staying up in retreat there. So very, very skillful.
Yeah. Should we talk about how you became a Lama? Yes.
Yeah. I was going to say, we still haven't talked about how I did practice too much, or how I did retreat, or
I keep coming back to it. Yeah.
So we'll talk a little bit about that, and then maybe just for 10 minutes, and then maybe we'll, if we want to do next time, we can talk more about that. So anyway, just to tell a little bit. So I did receive many teaching, not just many teaching from Dudjom Rinpoche, Chatral Rinpoche, so many teaching from Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche. And then, at that time, I was staying mostly in Bodhanath, which is on the outskirts of the Kathmandu Valley, where the great stupa was. And at that time, that was like the very center point in Nepal. And most of the great lamas, if they weren't staying there, they were slowly moving to come to Nepal from different places in India, or at the very least, they would visit there. So for like 2 or 3 years, I stayed there, and pretty much most of the time, Tulku Rinpoche was staying there and giving formal teachings maybe half of the time, and informal teachings always. And that time he was staying almost always at Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche's monastery upstairs there, because he hadn't built any place for himself or even begun to build his own place yet. And he hadn't really determined that he was coming, permanently to Nepal, or more or less permanently. In Bodha, there were only 3 temples. There was Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche's temple, which was combined Nyingma Kaju. There was a Sakya Gumpa, a very beautiful small Sakya Gumpa that had been built by a very, very great Sakya Lama named Tariq Rinpoche. I got lots of teachings from the great Sakya Lamas. So Deshung Rinpoche, Jobje Trichin Rinpoche, Luding Kempo Rinpoche. And then at that time, Namkai Norbu Rinpoche, who we generally associate as being a Dzogchen teacher, actually he's a Tulku from the Sakya tradition. So he came first time to visit Nepal from Italy with just a very few of his students, and he stayed at the Sakya Gumpa and gave a lot of teachings there at that time. And then pretty much all the great Kaju and Nyingma Lamas would visit on occasion. So, Painter Rinpoche, Dodrup Rinpoche, Minling Trichin Rinpoche, Dalong Chatral Rinpoche, Tulsik Rinpoche. I mean, there were just so many great masters, Kamtrul Rinpoche, that we could, receive teaching from. You could go and visit 2 or 3 of these great lamas in any day. And, the system there is not like in the West. There's no appointments needed, no prior kind of, getting on a list or being known to the. You could just show up, and if the Lama was free, pretty much you could meet. I mean, unless he had some special, people that he was talking to something private about. But most of the Tibetans, they don't have the same sense of privacy that Westerners have either. Yeah. So even if they're inquiring about their business or about their family matters or something like this is totally open. That's not anything that people consider that the other person shouldn't be, have to leave the room while they're asking, Maybe if it's something very embarrassing, their kids are getting a divorce or something like that, then they would be, want you to go out or something. Or if it was something kind of political message that they were bringing from someone to some place, then you'd be, they'd have a private meeting. But otherwise, everything is, open, and everybody in the group is, respecting that as well. So. And everybody is feeling like, if you're together in the presence of this great Lama like Khyentse Rinpoche, then, you're all like family. So after that, you would always regard each other as family. And if you went to visit one of the Tibetans that you'd met there, were there, they'd always offer you tea and be very kind and polite with you or helpful, or if you met them, you would be, as helpful as you could be. So it was really a very, warming experience. You didn't have to think about constructing Sangha. You automatically, from having been together in the presence of the Jews, you would regard each other in a special way and as Sangha, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that was really something wonderful. So, and besides, then there were some also very, very experienced Ngakpas, Vajrayana masters that were coming also to receive teaching from Khyentse Rinpoche and Dudjom Rinpoche. So, all the kind of very more explicit teaching that you're not going to get from those great masters directly, right? Sometimes they would give, they would give very, very detailed instruction on the view and on the main, points of meditation. But about how to do specific sadhana practices, how to do specific deity practices, how to do these kind of practices or that kind of, they're not going to be giving usually detailed instruction again and again and again, right? About that. So, Tulku Rinpoche, he was very kind. So we would go over to enjoy going over to his house. He had a little rented place nearby, so we would go there and sometime early in the morning or in the afternoon and the evening. And he liked very much to have a glass or two of Tibetan rice wine. So we'd bring some rice wine over always. And, also bring some food, rice and dal, lentils and vegetables and stuff. So, they could all have dinner, and usually we'd all eat something together. And then he would give teachings and, any kind of questions, or we would just chat. And they had a very good group of people there. There was two Tibetan brothers. One, his name was Ngudrup, and later he became translator and student of Dungse Tinli Nobu, and went to New York. And unfortunately, he passed away at a rather young age. And then there's Eric Pema Kunzang, who was translator now, is a very, very excellent translator and translated most of Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche's teachings and a lot of the teachings for Trungpa Rinpoche and a lot of the other great Kaju masters. And then there was another Danish fellow named Jakob Lashley, also now a very good practitioner, and he's, I think, looking after Zonsar Khyentse Rinpoche's centers in Australia. And several other people were there, and Jakob had a girlfriend whose name was Mitla, I think. And actually, I saw her on Facebook a few years ago and reconnected with her. And she was Italian and very, very alluring and cute, So, and Chakti Tulku, especially, he had a keen eye for the ladies, and he especially liked her. So I remember two Westerners, they came and they wanted to ask him about chud practice, that you do with cutting practice with a drum, and how to do the sadhana. And But unfortunately, this was a little late in the afternoon, so Tulku Rinpoche had already had a couple glasses of rice wine and this beautiful Italian girl, Mitla. You know, she wasn't just good looking; she had very nice kind of character, attitude about her. You know, it was very light. She wasn't ever focused, you know, or grasping onto anything so much. So he was chatting with all of us and them, and they came in and they said, "Oh, you know, we want to ask Rinpoche a few questions about this practice." And Rinpoche says, okay. And then they're asking, and Rinpoche gives a few explanations. And obviously he's feeling a little tired from all this, you know, kind of pedantic questions that they're asking. So they're asking, and Rinpoche's answers keep getting shorter and shorter, and then his gaze is, you know, sitting up on the bed, and then he's, you know, like a kind of a bench, and then he's looking down sort of at Mitla every once in a while, sort of gazing at her. Then, you know, gazes become longer and longer, and his answers become shorter and shorter. And then finally they ask this very long question to Tulku Rinpoche. You know, Rinpoche, in this sadhana, first it says we read this, and then we do this, and then the visualization is like this. You know, how do we do this and that? And then there's no answer. And then, you know, Nudrup, the translator, he's a very, very polite fellow. So he's just not saying anything and looking over at Rinpoche. And Rinpoche is just sort of gazing at Mitla. And then he says, Nudrup finally says, Rinpoche. He says, just Rinpoche. And then Chandi Tulku says, Shishe, which is the Tibetan translated as, who knows? So then, you know, all these two Westerners that are asking the question, they're sort of like on the edge of the cushion, you know, there's, oh, what did Rinpoche say, you know? And they look at the translator and they say, oh, well, what did Rinpoche say, you know? What did he say? And then Nudrup is very hesitant, you know, to reply. And they said, what did Rinpoche say? And then Nudrup finally says, Rinpoche says he doesn't know. and then they had this bewildered look on their faces, these Westerners. They still weren't getting it.
Yeah.
But anyway, then they finally had another cup of tea, and then they figured that was enough for today, so they took off. But anyway,
just like you said, that I think it applies to all teachers, that when approaching teachers, you kind of have to have sensitivity, what to ask and when to ask. So,
yes.
And yeah, like if it's not a good time to ask, don't ask.
Yes.
Find a better time. Yeah.
It's always better to wait than to get a no, right?
It is, definitely. Yeah.
But when you sense the time is right, don't hesitate. I'll give you one last example, and then we'll sign off.
Okay.
So one time I was in Hong Kong. This was like 7-8 years later. And so I just happened to be in Hong Kong for a few days, and I heard that Kalu Rinpoche had come to Hong Kong. So I had received many teaching before from Kalu Rinpoche, so I went to meet him. And so, you know, we had a very nice conversation. He was staying in a hotel in some place in Hong Kong. And then I was about to go, and he said, well, you know, I came here and I'm supposed to give the Kala Chakra initiation, the long Kala Chakra initiation, which is similar to the one that Holiness Dalai Lama gives, but with the Kaju lineage of it. So that's also preserved there, and Kalu Rinpoche was one of the masters of that. And he said, but my translator hasn't shown up, and I can't get anyone to translate. Can you translate?
Mm-hmm.
And it's starting in 2 days. It's supposed to start. So, I said, well, Rinpoche, I don't know really anything about the Kala Chakra, but, if you just please speak rather slowly and clearly, then definitely it would be my honor to translate. So then Kalu Rinpoche was very, very happy, and relieved because he didn't have any translator, and he had 500 people coming to this auditorium to receive the Kala Chakra initiation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then, I sensed it was a good opportunity. So I said to Kalu Rinpoche, who was one of the great, besides the Karmapa, at that time, he was probably the greatest living Mahamudra master. I said, Rinpoche, just during the break sometime, could you just give me a little instruction on Mahamudra? Few words about that, few teaching about that. And then Kalu Rinpoche says, oh, no problem. Sure. That's, anytime. I just sort of snuck that in at the end of the meeting, and he was very, very happy. And then, sure enough, so and it worked out perfectly. And he spoke rather slowly, and then I was able to translate. And he had a very wonderful time together. It was about 10 days or something, this initiation and transmission and everything. And so amazing. But, just as you're saying, if the teacher is happy, that's the time to request. And then if you just need to make the slightest of requests at that time. And then, he gave quite extensive instruction. So.
Yes.
If he's interested in other things, that's definitely not a good time to request. Right? So hopefully your students will apply the same methods. Be thinking carefully about that when they're requesting teaching from you.
Well, if I just make a short comment about that before we wrap this up, I'll be happy to continue longer, but I don't want to keep you too long if you have other things to do. But our system of training is quite different from Tibetan system of Vajrayana, and also the cultural dynamics is very different. We are all Westerners and lay people, so we have a regular retreat schedule. We have monthly retreats that are now held online because of the Corona situation. So sometimes my students ask me about certain teachings that I've talked about, but mostly it's like you said in the beginning, that mixture of Mahayana and simple Vajrayana. So mostly I just keep teaching the same things, but from a slightly different perspective. So it's mostly the same thing over and over again. and without anybody asking, because they are there who want to be there and who need instruction and who need pointing out. So this is what I offer, and I don't think I've ever had actually I do remember a couple of times when I have been kind of formally approached and asked for some teachings, and I've then given, but we have a very informal atmosphere and really casual atmosphere also, and like a completely different cultural dynamics, like Westerners. So
Yes,
it's very different in that sense.
Yeah, and that way being relaxed is good from the beginning.
Yeah.
Of course, too relaxed is also not good, but
Yeah.
you have to have a balance there.
Yeah, of course.
Necessary balance.
But what I like about there is this people who really want to practice, who really have a need.
Yes.
They find a method of practice and a teacher that suits them. Of course, according to karmic connections, but I feel that I'm kind of, as a teacher, I'm kind of fortunate and grateful for that my students, they have this need for practice. So we don't have should I say, hang around members in our Sangha, and I don't teach in a way that would entertain hang around members. So I try to stick to the point and deliver the fruit as I teach. Yeah, you're welcome. If you want to join any of our retreats, you're welcome to come and take a look.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So maybe we can, if you want, we could continue next time. And I still haven't talked about the practice that I did, but we'll definitely get to that. And then I think it's important to talk a little bit about, the kind of fusion of, Dzogchen and Mahamudra with the Vajrayana, or the methods that don't have it fused with Vajrayana, or just have it sort of very modestly fused.
Yeah.
So
that sounds.
And
good.
I'd really like to hear and have a little more conversation with you about your Bhumi model, because I think for students to be able to have some method of evaluating the teacher is, that's extremely important.
Yeah.
And students shouldn't just abrogate that responsibility. I see a lot of people in the West that say, well, I really don't know anything about Buddhism, so I'm not capable of judging, this, or saying anything about this teacher, whether they're, what their qualities. How would I know? How would you expect me to know? Well, I think that's not quite a valid way of approaching it. I think that's a little bit irresponsible way of approaching it.
Yeah, I think irresponsible is a good word to describe that. And maybe just a short note about that it is common sense that when somebody has some insight or realization of selfless state of mind, that person's mind is different than what it used to be. And it's different from the minds of others who haven't had that insight experience. So what is mind? Mind relates directly. Mind is what the energy body is. It means that there is some change in the energy body, meaning chakras and nadis, centers and channels. So there's some change in the mind, which is the energy body. So what I do with bhumis is that, the so-called bhumis, is that we simply look and feel the change in the energy body. And this is exactly the same that everybody does with any type of yoga practice, dharma practice, or in life general. It is kind of when it's when I've talked about this with many people, you know, people become very doubtful because they don't want to believe, or they reject the idea that anybody could measure somebody else's state of mind or realization. But you know, people read others' energy, they read others' emotions on everyday life. Even common people do that. You know, we
all the time.
Yeah, exactly. So this is like a bhumi reading is just like a kind of a taking it a bit more seriously and having an approach, a way to study that
Yes.
that stages of realization. So it's nothing mystical, you know. People have that ability, and it's just learning how to do that, learning how to see, learning how to perceive in detail.
Yeah, it's an extension of what we're commonly doing anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, look at our politics in America now. I mean, that's primarily how people are relating to President Trump. They're not relating to him on the basis of what policies so much he's instituting.
Yeah.
They're relating to him as an energetic phenomena.
Yeah.
And some people love it, and some people are repulsed by it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But it's more on the level of energetic phenomena than actual analyzing his policies or his position. So,
Yeah.
Anyway. Okay, well, thank you very, very much for having me. And
yeah.
Okay.
By all means, let's continue our interviews and dialogue. And thank you once again, Lama John. Talk to you later.
Thank you very much, Rinpoche. Okay.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.